When we think of terms like resurrection or ascension, or when we talked much earlier about the apotheosis, the deification of the emperor, it may be very difficult for us living in a post-Enlightenment world to get our imagination back into a pre-Enlightenment world and to understand what they meant by these things. We want to know immediately, is it literal or is it metaphorical? And if we're told it's metaphorical and symbolic, we try to say, well, that's not important. It's the literal stuff that's important. But for the ancients, they were absolutely capable of telling a story, telling a parable, using a symbol, using an image, getting the meaning, getting the claim that's been made, without necessarily saying, well, I really want to know, is it literal? If I was there, could I have seen it? So let me focus a little bit on ascension. We talked about resurrection. Let me focus on ascension. We want to get in, as I said, to an argument about literal. Go back into the 1st century, or back into the 2nd century, for example, when Christian writers and pagan writers were reading one another. In the 1st century, most of the anti-Christian work was sort of just name-calling. But by the 2nd century, somebody like Justin Martyr was reading and knowing, of course, the pagan stories, and the pagans were knowing the Christian stories. And they're arguing with one another. How do they argue? Does Justin Martyr, for example, say, well, your claim that Caesar has risen from the dead and got arisen from at least the funeral pyre, if not the dead, and be taken up among the gods, that's impossible. And when Christians were read by pagans, did they say, well, your story about Jesus rising from the dead, that's impossible? Neither of them claimed, as we very often do in our post-Enlightenment world, impossibility. They couldn't. Their stories told these. They knew, for example, claims that Caesar had ascended into heaven. They knew, for example, Christian claims that Christ had ascended into heaven. They didn't ask, as we might ask, well, is that literal? Could you go up there in some cloud 9 and find them? They said, what claim are you making? If Caesar is among the gods, so what? If Christ is among the gods, so what? And they knew exactly what they meant by it, because the claim a human being was among the gods is the claim that this human being's vision, this human being's program, this human being's life was a powerful, transcendental gift to the human race. That's what they meant. When somebody in the 1st century said a human being was divine, or if he was male, a son of God, or a revelation of God, or a divine manifestation, or any of that language, the claim they are making in their language is that this person has done something of transcendental importance for the human race. So of course when they died, they didn't just molder into dust, they were taken up among the gods. To be quite clear, I don't care whether we like that language or not. I don't care whether we say, well, we don't think human beings can be divine. Divine is their language for having brought extraordinary gifts to the human race. Quite frankly, our only term for that might be something like genius. And they might say to us, well, what do you mean by genius? And we say, we haven't a clue, actually. We just think this person is weirdly extraordinary. Well, that's what we call divine, they would have said. So to claim, for example, that Jesus has ascended or resurrected, or that Caesar has ascended or resurrection, is to make a claim about an incarnate program. An incarnate program. Whose program should run the world? Imagine it like almost a presidential debate. Caesar, Christ. Whose program should run the world? Whose program should be voted in? That might sound to trivialize it, but that's the way they're thinking. To say that I believe in Caesar or I believe in Christ is to say I commit myself to that program, not that program. So let me focus a little bit on the word ascension in the Christian tradition. The Greek-Roman equivalent would be apotheosis. taking up among the gods. What's involved there? For example, Julius Caesar, when he died in 44 BCE, assassinated in 44 BCE, it was claimed that during the celebration of his death and burial, a comet was seen streaking across the sky, and that was his soul going up among the gods. And it was shown, this comet of Caesar, on the coins. Augustus put it on there with his own face on one side, and on the other you have the rays coming out from the comet and its fiery tail, and this is Caesar going up among the gods. In the beginning it's just shown symbolically, but a claim has been made. And it makes no difference whether you or I might think, well, that's kind of silly, that's just a comet. What's that got to do? If they believe that Caesar is among the gods, then of course his adopted son Augustus is DVF, Theou Huios, son of God. That's what the claim has been made. He has a right to run the Roman world then. As the story developed, the Romans worked out this vision. Well, what happens when an emperor dies? And of course he has to be buried immediately, and then the Senate, maybe a week later or whenever, votes him to be divine and says he is now among the gods. What kind of a ceremony can you have for that? They took maybe an ivory image of the dead emperor. They took it out into the Campus Martius, the Camp of Mars outside the city, and they burned the effigy and released an eagle into the sky. And as the eagle soared into the sky, it, as it were, carried the body, the soul of the emperor among the gods. Again, think literal, think metaphorical. But, you know, it probably was not wise in those days to walk up to an emperor and say, you know, the emperor we just sent among the gods, that's just metaphorical. It probably wouldn't have been wise. So, for example, you have even powerful, important members of the imperial family who are in the line of succession, like Germanicus. You have images of Germanicus. It's kind of awkward to describe, but he's almost sitting on the back of an eagle being carried up to heaven. In the Arch of Titus, remember, Titus was the one who destroyed the Jewish temple and used its spoils to build the Flavian amphitheater, the Colosseum. When you go to the Arch of Titus in Rome, most people are quite aware of, on one side of the arch, you see the triumphal chariot when he was back in Rome celebrating his triumph. And on the other side, you see the spoils from the Jewish temple, the candelabra, all that everyone knows. And very often you forget to look up. You're inside the arch if you can get in now. Look up and you see Titus on the back of an eagle being carried up to God. So on his death, I think it was 81 CE, on his death, he's carried up among the gods. So the image you keep seeing of the Roman tradition is the dead emperor being taken up among the gods. You can go all the way after Titus. You can go in to I think I forgot to mention Nero. It happens for Nero earlier. It happens for Antoninus Pius in the 2nd century in the Tunisian town of Douga. You can still see today a somewhat battered temple, and on the peak of the temple you can barely make out an eagle, and behind it is the figure of Antoninus Pius being taken up to heaven. So all over the Roman Empire, the idea of a human being who had attained divine status being taken up to heaven is part of the wallpaper. It's not something that is, I'm not going to say it's not extraordinary, but the claim has been made for the emperor. Now, when this claim is taken from the emperor and applied to Christ, when you're not just talking about, say, resurrection, which you've already discussed, but ascension. As Justin Martyr said, you have the ascension of the emperor and you have the ascension of Christ. And his claim that, well, these are the same thing, which seem to be giving up the whole Christian message. But in that world, his claim is, all right, they're both in heaven. They're both among the gods. Who is going to do more for the earth? That is really the claim they're making. Who of these two is going to do more for the earth? So, when Justin Martyr, for example, compares the divine, any claims made of Jesus and any claims made of the emperor, he's willing to say, we're not claiming anything that you don't claim about your emperor. And when you read that the first time, you think, he's just given away everything. But then he continues, and this is what's going to make him a martyr. He's going to say, yes, but Jesus has done far more for the earth than all your emperors rolled together in a ball. That's my rough translation of his Greek. That's a claim. So whenever we hear language like, I say it again, divine, Son of God, all of that language, get over the Enlightenment. And ours say, well, we don't use that language. We don't believe that stuff. A claim is being made that this person's life, this person's vision, this person's dream gives extraordinary gifts to the human race. That's what you debate. You're debating whether Caesar, running the Roman Empire and giving you peace through victory, or Christ running the Christian empire, if you will, and giving us peace through justice. Which program runs the earth? Final example. In the New Testament, we find quite a few times mentioned Jesus is seated at the right hand of God. Now, most of us, when we read that, don't take it literally. We really don't. We don't think that God has a left hand and a right hand, and Jesus is seated here at his right hand. We sort of understand that that is some kind of a symbolic, metaphorical message. But what is the message? Who sits at the right hand? The heir apparent. If you look, say, at the Hippodrome in Istanbul, and you're looking at Theodosius, the images of Theodosius, the co-emperor from the west will be at his left hand, and on his right hand is going to be the heir apparent. There's two of them, a younger and older son, so he doesn't know which is that, but they'll be on his right hand. So the claim is being made, if Jesus is at the right hand of God, that Jesus is the heir apparent. That everything that God is, that God's whole dream of justice comes to us through Jesus. That's a Christian claim, of course. This is for Christians. So when you're reading Jesus is seated at the right hand of God, that one most of us get right. Most of us don't take that one literally. But that's only an indication of all the other things. The claim that has been made is that for Christians, everything that God is comes to us through Jesus. His life is the revelation of God. Now, that's a Christian claim. There is absolutely no reason why anyone outside Christianity would take that as a claim. But the claim is being made that the life of Jesus, a life of non-violent resistance to the violent normalcy of civilization, is a revelation of God. That's a claim worth thinking about. Is God violent? Is God non-violent? If God is violent, then of course our violence is justified. If God is non-violent and we are collaborating with God, then of course we have to be non-violent. So behind the claim like seated at the right hand of God is that claim. Jesus is the heir of all that God is. The God of the Jewish Bible, the God of justice, that's distributive justice, is revealed in Jesus, and he is the heir of God.